Okie dokie. Here we go. Hey, everybody. The day is here. I've been planning this event for a little over a month to promote the launch of my book, The Lovable Leader. For those of you that are here, thank you for joining me. For those of you that will be rolling in later or watching the replay, thank you for attending. All right, so this is just the sort of welcoming remarks section. This is where I'm going to talk a little bit about what today is going to be like, the sort of topics we're going to cover, all sorts of different stuff. So, got a little agenda that I'm going to look over to the side every once in a while for and go through a couple things. So, first things first, if you're not aware, the Lovable Leader launched officially today. So for many of you have pre-ordered and you're wondering, where's my copy? Well, today's the day where it starts to actually ship out because today is the official launch day. It's also available on Kindle. So if you do decide to buy a copy, one, thank you. But also it'd be really helpful if you left a 5-star review if you think it's worthy of 5 stars. If you don't, leave whatever review you think is honest. I'm open to hearing all feedback. If it's negative, it's positive. Would love to know. This is my first book. And I got to be honest, I'm not one to generally acknowledge most of my accomplishments in life. I tend to set a goal. I go about trying to achieve it. I either do or I don't. And if I do, I go great. And then I move on to the very next thing. So it's very unusual for me to take any time to stop and pause and acknowledge and appreciate the work that went into something or the accomplishment. This is probably the first thing that I can remember where I am truly unreservedly proud of what I've put together here and the accomplishment of creating a book. So that's, just for me is a really monumental occasion. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. Just so you know, you can buy it now on every channel, Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon, it's everywhere. But let me tell you a little bit about, I guess, what the book is about. But let me tell you actually first about what today is about. So I had this idea to have a launch event for the book so that, one, try and make a big splash, get as many people to know about it as possible. But more importantly, I think I really wanted to talk with people who were experts in the different areas that I talk about within the book. So there's a number of different concepts in the book that I talk about. And I wanted to find the people in my network or the people in my extended network who had a deep expertise in this particular area. Today, we're going to be kicking off on the entire event will start at 9:30 after these opening remarks and everything. And my first guest is going to be Chris Lynn. And I wanted to talk to him about the idea of people first leadership. Now, why Chris for that? Well, he has a podcast called Leading People First. So you can see the connection there. I've got Jeanette Branier, who's going to be coming on and talking about care. I've got Robin Dreek, who's going to be talking about trust. He wrote The Code of Trust, an amazing book. I've got Jeff Harry coming on to talk about safe travels, creating psychological safety, and creating an environment where play can happen at work. So I've got this incredible lineup of guests between day 1 and day 2. If you haven't seen the schedule, you can see it at jgibbard.com/event. That'll have both day 1 and day 2. I also wrote a post about it on my blog, which you can see at jeffgibbard.com/blog. So amazing group of people. And the reason I want to bring them on was not to talk about my book, because that's silly. Why bring people on to talk about me? I want to talk about them. I want to talk about what they know about. So I'm not bringing these experts on to talk about what they thought of my book or what they found in my book interesting or where it aligns with their work. No, instead, I just want to bring them on to talk about the concept that is included in my book. And then you'll be able to go in and actually read my book and see where the overlaps and the parallels are. And in some cases, where the inspiration came from. So that's kind of what today is about, is bringing on these amazing people and talking to them. It's a full day event. We're going to go from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. First guest starting at 9:30 and the last guest going to be at 5. And then I'll do a couple closing remarks on the day. I am taking a break for lunch because dude's got to eat. And I may take a break occasionally to have a sip of water because it's a long day of talking. You'd be surprised. We do these days of being on Zoom all day with people, and you know how exhausted you are. Imagine hosting a full day podcast. So I'm going to be pretty drained at the end of the day, but thankfully I've got people here that are going to bring out my best energy because they are just such fantastic, incredible, intelligent, remarkable people. And I honestly can't believe that I got the guest lineup that I do today. So hope you're excited about that. So let's talk a little bit about the book. So The Lovable Leader, build great teams with trust, respect, and kindness. Where'd it come from? How did this come about? A lot of people have been asking me about that in my network. They find out that I wrote a book and they're like, wow, what was that like? How did that come together? So my experience of writing a book is probably going to be a little bit different than a lot of other people, just for the sake of how my brain operates. With ADHD, I have a certain way of working that is counter to what a lot of the authors I spoke to, how they operated, right? So when I talked to a lot of authors about how they wrote a book, they would say, oh, well, I had to write every day and I wrote 500 words a day. So the truth is, this book took me 5 years to write, but it didn't take me 5 years to write. It took me 28 days. It took me 28 days over 5 years because I basically binge write. The very first day I sat down to write this book, I wrote 18,000 words at a clip. It took me a day. I sat down and it all came out. So for me, the process of writing a book was this labor of love of these intense peaks and valleys of intense hyper productive writing, and then these valleys of introspection and reflection and just thinking about what the book would become. And I'm really glad it took me as long as it did because I learned a lot in those valleys between the writing through experience of actually being a leader on different teams and how that showed up. So here's the genesis of the book though. So I had been running my own agency for at that point I think maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer than that. And my wife and I were taking a trip down to Annapolis, Maryland to visit some friends. And on the drive back, she had started asking me some questions about different scenarios that she was having at work because she had just moved into a new management role. And she had never really been in a role where she had to manage people. So she had a number of different questions, different scenarios, things that have come up, ways of dealing with conflict, things that are going well, things that are not going well. So we just started talking through different things. And in the conversation, what I had acknowledged is that one of the things that she really had going for her that was always going to work in her favor as a manager is that she's exceptionally lovable. She's just a very lovable person. Anybody that's met my wife, Erica, knows this. She's lovable. Um, and it was at that moment that it clicked for me, the lovable leader. And that was where the title came from. And actually, we're still in the car here. We're still talking about things. And I asked her to pull out my phone, open up Evernote, and jot down some of these notes in the outline that I was putting together. So we actually wrote the entire outline on the way from probably somewhere in, Delaware, edge of Delaware, maybe Maryland, until we got back to Philadelphia. By the time I got back, I had an outline. And the very next day is when I sat down to write those 18,000 words. So what is the book about? Why did it come together? It wasn't just the advice for my wife and what she was going through, but it was really a reaction to something that I think I had buried deep inside of me for a very long time. So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm psychologically unemployable, really very difficult for me to work for anybody. And I think one of the reasons why, and when I look back on it, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but I think one is I had a pretty significant amount of work trauma, work related trauma. And I don't mean like really, really difficult, hard, discrimination or anything. I just mean like I had bad bosses. I had people that didn't care about me. I had environments where I didn't feel like I was able to thrive. And especially with the way that I work, I just felt like I wasn't in an environment where I was going to be able to do my best work. And I also got to witness the impact of work on my parents. And I saw how work was for them. And I kind of grew up with this idea that work was like this meme, like this idea of like it's something you're not supposed to like. Your job is supposed to be this drudgery. And yet at the same time, my dad tried to instill in me this idea that if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I've been chasing that my entire life. And every job I found, it just squashed it. It never gave me the opportunity to live that passion, that purpose, that feeling that I was doing something worthwhile. So I'd say at the very start of it, when I started writing the book, what really came out was just a number of different reactions to bad bosses. I thought about all of the bad managers that I had, whether it be, even ones that I had good relationships with. When I watched the way that maybe interacted with others on the team, I'd been taking mental notes for, maybe 10 or 15 years at that point. So I had this entire library of how would a bad boss handle that? And how would I want to handle it in a different situation? If I was in that role, what would I do differently? So really one of the biggest and most profound influences on the book where I started with it was thinking about the opposite, right? So the not lovable leader, the leaders that you leave, the ones that you don't want to follow, right? And instead of building teams with trust, respect, and kindness, they build it on distrust, and they build it without respect, and they're not particularly kind. And I thought about those environments and how do we correct that? And I decided that I really wanted to write a book for new managers, people that are just coming into their very first role where they have to manage people, because I saw that as being the pathway to real change. It's difficult to take somebody who's been in the C-suite for the last 15 years and give them a new management model, a new way of thinking about managing their teams. They've gotten there. They're probably pretty set in their ways, at least more so than somebody who's fresh in the role and is trying to think about how they're going to define their leadership style. So I really want to write that book for those new managers because I see that as being the way that we affect change going forward and into the future. So one of the big ones, big influences of the book was Bad Bosses and Bad Managers. I would say the next was my parents. I think we're all incredibly influenced by our families, and I had two very different sort of household experiences. My parents divorced when I was like 10 or 11, and I noticed that there was just different ways that I felt in those two environments. My dad's house and my mom's house, and a lot of that really influenced me. And I won't get too deep into that whole dichotomy and how that influenced me, but I'd say that's another influence. As I was going through writing the book, though, I would say one of the biggest influences had to be the collection of books that I've read on the subject of leadership, on psychology, on self improvement and self help, and unlocking potential, and all of these different sort of influences all came together, and that was a big one. I'm just going to call out a few that I think are just incredibly important books that I had read prior to writing the book, and I'm going to give a shout out to a couple books that I've read after writing the book that I think are just fantastic. So consider this sort of your new manager's book bundle that I would recommend. I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of the most important books that anyone can read. I read it early on in my life. I was in my like early 20s. And I got to tell you, it absolutely shifted my perspective in life. I think everyone should read it. Simon Sinek wrote Leaders Eat Last. I think that's another great book. It really teaches you the principles of servant leadership, and it really shows you why that's an important thing to think about. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, another great book on ownership. And one of the things I really liked about that book is I'm not really one to be like super into books about war or military or anything like that. Like that's not my bag. But even though that was sort of the lens that a lot of the lessons in the book were taught through, it really resonated with me because it does such an excellent job of defining what ownership is. Um, Next book on the list is called The Code of Trust. I mentioned this at the top of the welcome, but today I actually have the author of that book, Robin Dreeke, coming on to talk about trust. I cannot even tell you what a big deal that is to me because I actually think The Code of Trust is a book that absolutely everyone should own. And one of the most beautiful things about the book is how it shows you how to build trust tactically. Like, what are the steps to do it? And it shows you why and how it works. And Robin was an ex spy, basically, that helped to recruit foreign spies. I mean, like, dude's background is remarkable, but the book is so beautifully strategic and tactical. And yet at the same time, he's very clear about not using these tactics like for the wrong reasons. He's talking about using it in an ethical way and how leaders can really benefit from it. It's an amazing book, The Code of Trust. Please go buy it. And then Influence by Robert Cialdini, I think is, just an interesting book that helps you to understand why people make certain decisions and what sort of things influence us to say yes and say no. So I thought those were all amazing books, and they really gave me a lot to think about, not always directly as I was writing the book, but a lot of times just kind of in the back of my mind. These are books that I thought were really just really well written and really made beautiful points and gave me a lot to think about strategically and tactically. Now, I want to give a couple others that I think are really, really worth buying that I've read after writing my book. So the first is going to be Good Authority by Jonathan Raymond. This book, if I could have any book to be paired with my book in a bundle that, like, you buy mine, these two should go together. The Good Authority is basically the companion piece to the Lovable Leader, and does such a good job where I would say that they're kind of a yin and yang to one another, talking about creating the right type of culture through your leadership, where you grow people, where you help them to reach their potential, and to create an environment where they can do that. So that's one, Good Authority by Jonathan Raymond. I also want to shout out another guest that I have coming on today. Leanne Davey wrote The Good Fight. It's a book about productive conflict, and it is remarkably full of value. I mean, like, the amount of like tactical like scripts and frameworks and ways of working through difficult conversations is incredible, and you should buy it. That's another one that if I could bundle it with my book, I absolutely would, because I think that it provides a lot of the tactical grounding that some of the theoretical ideas in the book really need. Now, my book is really focused on being tactical and giving you tools and frameworks, but I think The Good Fight really, I mean, it's basically like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's such an amazing book, so I'd highly recommend that. And then I had one more I wanted to say, but it is escaping me at the moment because I was just getting so excited about the books that I just said. Oh, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. It's probably, I think it's the best selling coaching book of all time. And I think for anybody that's moving into a new manager's role, having this book in your arsenal is going to make you a better leader. No question. If you were to have that book and apply it through the lens of lovable leadership, you're going to have an amazing team experience. You're going to have an immense amount of trust. You're going to be able to help grow your people. It's just going to be phenomenal. So those are the books that I would recommend that I read after the fact, but I think are really amazing companion pieces. So just a reminder, if you haven't yet picked up your copy, please do. It's on Amazon, and that's where I would prefer you buy it, but really buy it anywhere. It's not going to be in local bookstores anytime soon because it's an online only edition at the moment, but I'm going to be calling those bookstores. And if you know one that would like to have it, or if you are a bookstore and would like to carry my book, please let me know about it. Happy to do it. Okay, so I want to read you something from the book as well, because I think this gives a little bit of context and clarity around why I wrote the book and what it's all about. So I'm going to read you a section from the book. It's not very long, so I'm not going to read the whole book to you, although an audible version will be coming out. But this is called The Case for Doing Better, and it's part of the introduction of the book, which if you aren't ready to buy the book yet and you'd like to download the first chapter in the introduction, just to get a little flavor of it, to decide if it's for you, you can actually download the first chapter at lovableleader.com. It's right on the homepage there. You can download a preview. So I'm going to read you The Case for Doing Better, just a couple pieces from it. I have a strong opinion about the responsibility of leadership to make the world a better place. I want your team members to feel safe. I want you to actively reduce harm in every aspect of your leadership. I want you to appreciate your impact on other people and how your interactions can fundamentally reshape the world around you. I want you to finish this book with a default operating system that leads with others' best interest in mind. All of this can be accomplished without sacrificing results. Great leadership is a glorious balance held together by a deep understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, with the guidelines to ensure you honor the responsibilities of the role. Leadership is not an achievement nor a destination, but rather a practice that you will adopt for life. This is what lovable leadership is about. The aspects of leadership that require emotional intelligence, empathy, humility, compassion, and trust. Amid all of the other externalities, these are the things that we can control, how we relate to one another. Leaders who care for others and who can be trusted to lead into an uncertain future are a rarity these days. How often do you hear someone rave about what they do for a living? How often do they talk about how great their manager is? Even more rare, how often do you hear someone exclaim something like, I love my job and I trust my leadership completely? This is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I want to help change the culture of work that I think is so very, very broken in so many ways. And I want us to enjoy going to work. I want us to feel like we have relationships that are valuable at work. I want us to feel like the work that we do matters. And all of these things that I'm feeling are not just me. They're not just the things that I'm feeling. If you look at, and I look at this stuff a lot, but if you go over to Gallup and you look at all of their employee engagement surveys, look the past 5 years. And you could say, oh, it's all millennials and Gen Z and they're entitled and blah, 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 blah. If you do, then please, I invite you to open your mind and think that it's more than that. We want to have a reason to go to work. We want to have some purpose in our lives. And what we're seeing is that the reason people leave, the top 3 reasons, I believe, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but in 2021, they did a survey. Why are people leaving? They didn't see opportunities for development. They didn't have good relationships at work, and they weren't clear on on what the company's purpose was. Purpose, relationships, and opportunities for growth. These are things that leaders can absolutely impact and affect. I think it was like something like 56% of people that left a job said that they think that their organization or manager could have done something to get them to stay. Think about that. We're in the midst of the great attrition and everybody's throwing up their hands trying to figure out what it is. The answer has been in front of us for like a decade. There's an expression, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. We have known this for a very long time. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to keep searching around for the answer like it's not there? No, we have to do something about it. And I think it begins with creating environments where we have trust, where we have respect, where we have kindness, where we have, dare I say it, because I know this is not a very professional thing to say, but we need love. We need care for other people. Care, respect, kindness, trust. These are elements of love. These are things that you think about from people that you love. You have these elements in place. Why can't we have it at work? And I think the biggest reason is that our culture has put business before people. And I, for one, don't think that that's the best way for us to do this. I think we should be putting people before business, because business will come out of that. There's a lot of people will say this, and I would agree with it. I think Richard Branson even said this, and dude's a billionaire, so he must know something. But you put your employees first. Why do you put your employees first? Because if you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of the customer. The customer isn't first. The employee is first. So put your employees first, and they're going to take care of your people. So I'm going to give you, I only have about 10 minutes left before my first guest, Chris, gets here, who I am so excited to talk to as our kickoff event. Only a few more things left to talk about before I invite Chris in there. All of you who are watching, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all. I see you, Alex, and I see LinkedIn user who I can't tell who that is just because of the way that this comes up. But thank you for watching and joining my launch event. And I'm looking forward to all the other people that joined in as well. Share it far and wide, let the people know. Okay, so a couple big concepts from the book before we get started. I think this will actually really help to contextualize today's event and who I brought on and why. So a couple things. I want to start off first with the lovable leader mindset. So one of the things that I've come to realize as I've talked with leaders, as I coach people, as I talk with my wife almost every morning. Oh, hi, Yvonne. Amazing. Oh, and Chris. Amazing. Love you both. So glad you're both here. One of the things that I've noticed is that as I talk to leaders, that leaders know that this is hard. Being a leader is hard, especially when you deal with like situations where you've got someone who's super difficult and all you want to do is just like rip their head off because you think that they're wrong and you're reacting emotionally because you're a human being, right? But then you're like, I know that that's not the right way to actually build this relationship. I know that's not the best way to get this person to see the value of what we're doing. I know it's not the best way to grow this person. So like, you know, these things, but you have these emotional responses and it's difficult. And that's why I believe that leadership, the first lens of leadership is that leadership is a burden. It's difficult. You have to do more. You have to be the bigger person at times. You have to deal with situations that you quite frankly don't want to deal with. You have to deal with people who are not motivated and you have to motivate them. You have to deal with people who are so motivated that they're running over other people like a steamroller and you have to rein them in for the sake of the team. Like it's not easy. So the first lens of leadership is a burden. The second lens is, though, that leadership is a privilege, because if you have the opportunity to be at the table where you get to make decisions of consequence, where you get to be involved in decisions about maybe hiring and firing, this is a privilege to be in that position. It's also a privilege because when you're in a leadership role, people pay you deference. They listen to what you have to say. Now, in some cases, that's because of the implied authority that you have as a manager. People are going to listen to you because, well, maybe their job depends on it, their salary depends on it. And I think it's important not to leverage that, but to understand that that exists. That's a privilege of leadership, that you are higher in the hierarchy sometimes, and that by your position alone, by your title alone, sometimes you are given authority that other people don't have. You have a voice that other people may be clamoring to have. So it is a privilege and you should honor that. But part of the way that you honor your privilege is by trying to tear down any sort of systems that get in the way of other people not having a voice. And especially if the way that you got your manager role is a function of some other form of privilege, you know, whether it be, you know, relationships or your race, gender, ethnicity, any of that. If those things are part and parcel of how you got your role, then it should be incumbent upon you to use that position of privilege to tear down those systems that afford you that privilege so that everyone has an equal opportunity to join in and become leaders in that organization. So it's a privilege. That's the second thing. It's a burden and it's a privilege. And the third one, and this one is all about my guy right here, Spider-Man. It's a responsibility. If you are going to be a leader, you need to know that it is not a function of your title. It is a function of your choice. Leadership is a mindset. If you decide you are going to lead, I don't care if you are at the bottom of your org chart, you can lead. You can lead upward. And my man Alex, who's on the live stream right now, he talks a lot about role-based leaders, and it's something that I'm going to be talking about in the future at some point. But everybody has a role in which they are the leader, and it's context dependent. So leader isn't a singular position for one person in a team. Leadership is contextual based upon what's happening. So the point being is that leadership, if you feel the call to do it, if you feel like you want to be a leader, that's a decision. It's not a title. And if you feel it, that means that you know that it's your responsibility. You know that if you have the desire to go out and lead towards greater, bigger, more amazing things, you know that you can't not answer that call. And it's partly because there's two kind of, I don't even call them competing, but philosophies on the ethical right thing to do. There's deontology and teleological. Deontological and teleological. So deontological, to just to make it simple, is you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So it's about the intent. You do the right thing, it's the right thing to do. That's a Spider-Man thing. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. And then there's teleological ethics, which is you do the right thing because the impact down the road is the right thing, even if in the beginning the initial decision seems wrong. That's Iron Man. That's Tony Stark. Build a suit of armor around the world, but it'll protect us in the end, right? So I believe in kind of blending these two things, but ultimately, I think if you feel like you have a calling to become a leader, it's your responsibility to do it. So when you're in the position where you're a leader, you're going to experience all three of those lenses. You're going to experience the fact that it's a responsibility, a burden, and a privilege. And it's going to bounce back in between all of those at any given time, because that is what it is to be a leader, is to experience those three lenses at any given time. And when you accept that, leadership's going to be a lot easier for you. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but when you expect that those are the three different types of experiences that you're going to have, three different ways of looking at leadership, the things that you wind up having to do make more sense. When you have to go into a tough conversation and you believe and you understand that it is a burden to have to do that, all of a sudden it makes more sense. You start to feel like, well, it does suck, but I have to do it because it's my responsibility. And because I have the privilege of leadership, I'm going to do this for the good of the team, for the good of my people, for the good of, my own future, whatever it is. You get a better sense of that leadership is at all times these three things. So I'm going to give you a couple more things. I only have 4 minutes until my first guest comes on, but couple of big concepts in the book, and this is what we're starting out the morning with. So the entire morning session is about these three things. These are the three pillars of lovable leadership: care, trust, safe travels. So here's what I mean by this. As a leader, here are the things that you have the ability to set as the context of everything that you do. Now, there's roles, there's responsibilities for leadership. So there's like goal setting, there's strategy, there's management, there's conflict resolution. Those are things that you have to do as a leader. They're sort of functions of the job, right? And then there's the sort of things that you have to do as a leader, like be in service of, be a cheerleader, be a coach. Like you have all these different roles. But in terms of the pillars of lovable leadership, what I'm talking about here is care means that care is at the core of how you lead. You care about your people. You care about the work. You care about your organization, and you care about yourself. Care needs to be baked into every single thing. And we're going to be talking about this morning. We're also going to be talking about trust, because you cannot build a strong team without trust. Trust is about consistency. You build it over time, and it's about predictability. People need to know. They need to know on your team. They need to know that you know what you're talking about, that you have their best interest in mind, that you're going to come to support them and protect them when they need you. If you don't have that on a team, you don't have a team. You got a rabble band of people together that are working together for now. But if you have strong bonds of trust, that team will stay together like a family. And I'm using that term very, very carefully, because I'm not trying to tell you your team is a family. What I'm saying is familial bonds are the strongest we have, and those are built on love and care and trust. So trust is going to be the second piece of it. And then the third piece is safe travels. And I deliberately chose safe travels as the final one because a leader's job is to go somewhere. It's to lead people somewhere. So that's the travels part. You have a destination and you need to get there. So a leader's job is to lead somewhere. If you don't have a destination, you're not a leader. You're maybe like you're a club. You have a hobby. Leaders take people places. So you have a destination, but what's important about that? If you were getting on a flight from New York to LA, it's not about getting on the plane. It's about getting off the plane in LA, right? Safely. That's the goal. It's not about the journey itself happening if you don't get to the end safely. So I believe that a leader's job is not just to set big, ambitious goals in the future, but make sure that the right people are on the team so that we all get there safely and we accomplish what we're trying to do. So safe travels is that third piece that I think is so essential that actually brings the first two home. If you build a team on care and trust, and then you provide safety on the way to the destination, you're going to be in good shape. So those are the three pillars of lovable leadership. And I'm really excited for today. Really excited about the people that are on here. I'm just looking at some of the comments that are in here. Love all of you. Thank you so much. These are great comments. Throw some of them up on here in case anybody hasn't seen them. We all need loving kindness. People before profits, build it right, and then profitability surely come. Couldn't agree more. Um, Privilege and weight indeed. We must always use this power and our superpower for good. Always love it, love it, love it. And Alex, thank you so much. Um, John, good to see you, man. Good to see you. So my first guest, Chris Lynn, is going to be coming up in a minute. And I want to just kind of outline a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. That is across the day of the event. So I'm starting off with Chris. We're going to be talking about people first leadership. And that's really, in so many ways is what lovable leadership is about. It's about putting your people first and making that the core of what you do as a leader. So the first person I'm talking to for the first half hour is going to be Chris. Then we're going to take a quick little break. We'll then move to having my next guest at 10:15, Jeanette Brony. We're going to be talking about care, and we're going to go deep into what that means, both care for your team, but also care for yourself, creating an environment of care. So that's going to be really awesome. Then 10:45, Robin Dreek is going to be coming on, the man himself, the Code of Trust author. We're going to be talking about trust, and I'm really excited about that. Then at 11:15, I'm really excited. I'm going to share with you as people for my launch event. I'm actually going to share with you the most important, what I believe is the most important framework in the book. I'm like really big on like frameworks and really big on processes and things like that. So like I use them as like mental shortcuts, mental models. So I'm going to share with you the most important framework in the book, which is called sitting on the same side of the table. It's why there's two chairs on the same side of a table on the cover of my book, because it's the most important framework in the book. And it's one that I use almost every single day. It's one that I coach people on constantly. If you follow this formula, it's going to work in a lot of different types of conversations. So I'm going to share that with you at 11:15. At 11:30, I have Jeff Harry coming on, and we're going to talk about safe travels. So that's pretty exciting. So that's going to be a good time. And then we're going to take a break for lunch, 12 to 1. 1 o'clock, I have Angela Chi coming on to talk about communication. At 1:30, I have Mark Pittman coming on to talk about goals and goal setting as a leader. At 2:15, this is an incredibly impactful and important one for me, but Jess Gengemi formerly from my agency, like forever ago, is going to be coming onto the show to talk about strategy. And that's like, I'm going to try and keep it together at that point, but she's just gone on to become like such a rock star, and I'm so excited to talk to her. At 2:45, I have Leanne Davey coming on to talk about productive conflict. If you haven't read her book yet, please go and grab a copy. It's called The Good Fight. It's amazing. And then we have another little break. And then at 3:30, I have Celeste Headley coming on. She wrote a book called Do Nothing, and I read it twice last year. And part of my commitment for this year is to actually do less. The book's amazing. We're going to talk about balance and how, as a leader, you have to balance different things. Sometimes, like being kind of like laissez-faire versus being a micromanager. Like there's this balance that you have to strike as a leader, where you're doing you have to kind of find a way of finding that middle ground. And sometimes you have to play in the extreme. So we're going to talk with Celeste about that. I am super excited. That is like an amazing get for me to have her on the show because wow, her book is so amazing. And then last speaker of the day I have coming on at 4 o'clock is Dr. George James. If you listen to my podcast, Shareable, I was actually on his podcast called Leapcast, which is leaders, entertainers, athletes, and performers. He talks about mental health and things like that. We're both he's actually with Council for Relationships, which is an organization I'm on the board of, and I'm really excited to have him come on the show. And that'll be the end of it. Then I'll do some closing remarks and all of that. But let me just check to see if I have a note from Chris. Because he should be coming on any moment now. Cool. So Chris should be here any moment. In the meantime, if you haven't gone and gotten your copy of The Lovable Leader yet, please do. I'm going to just put myself on mute for a moment and put the schedule back up, and I will be back in just a moment. Forgive us, we're just experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties because occasionally these things happen. So I'm working with Chris right now. We're trying to get him on, so that might just cut short some of our conversation, but let's see what we can do. Technology. Sorry about this, everyone. Haha, we have him. Chris.
Hey, what's going on? Sorry about that. That was a user error on my part.
All good, all good. I'm so glad that you're here, though. So thank you for joining me. Let me open up my Chris Lynn notes, and I'm really excited to have you here. While I'm just getting settled, tell people a little bit about you and where what your background is, and why I have you here coming to talk about people first leadership.
Yeah, well, Jeff, thank you again for having me, and congrats on the book. I'm really excited about getting my hands on that thing. And yeah, so I'm Chris Lynn. I am the host of the Leading People First podcast, and I do a bunch of work traditionally in learning development. So I go into organizations and help build their learning programs. And um, I just love everything around L&D, everything around DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And so that's where I really believe that we can make a difference is by building people up for success in the roles that they're in order to make change. So yeah,
Got it.
really excited to be here.
Awesome, man. All right, well, let's get into it. We got about 20 minutes where we can talk about people first leadership. So I figure a great place for us to start is I think a lot of people have a lot of different things that come to mind when the word leadership comes up. And I was wondering if you could just share for us what you think of and how you would define what are leaders? What is leadership? What is the role of a leader?
Yeah, at the heart of leadership, right, is people, right? We're not doing anything unless it's about people, and I think that's what often gets lost in translation when we think about leadership is we think about businesses, we think about profits, we think about systems and processes, but really at the end of the day, the people that are doing the work are people, right? The things that are making things happen are people, and we need to focus on those people. That's who we're leading. And so that's why leading people first is all about recentering the human experience for leadership.
Why do you think it's so difficult why is that not the culture? Because when you say it, it seems so obvious to me. And I know that we're very much aligned in our perspective about the role of a leader and what is leadership, but it would seem that business is just people doing stuff with people, right? It's transactions with people amongst people. Uh, Being at work, it's just interactions of people working together towards a thing. So people are seemingly always right in front of us. Why is it not the case that that's the default? Like why are you doing a podcast about it and why am I writing a book about it that people are not out in front?
Because we have not prioritized that in our society. What are the things that we've prioritized, right? It's money, it's success in various terms, but we have not prioritized the success of people as humans, right? We haven't prioritized what it means to have a healthy relationship with ourselves or with other people, right? We've prioritized this idea and we've created this idea in society. And I'll speak strictly from the the American United States experience, that we are always looking at success from the materialistic, and the only way to get that material is through, unfortunately, money. So that kind of mindset that we've created as a society has shifted our priorities, and leading people first is, and I heard you saying it, is putting people over profits and not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your work, you do this sort of people first leadership training and coaching and things like that. And then you also have this podcast, which is up to how many episodes now?
I'm just over 50 or 60 episodes. I think that's around where I'm at.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really about helping others understand that this model of business of putting people over profits is successful.
Yeah. So, in all that experience, the podcast, the number of people you've spoken to about these issues, the people you've worked with professionally in this way, w- describe for us a little bit, what does a people first leadership culture even look like? What are some of the things that they do differently?
Yeah, it's around creating an experience for the individual and what we can do to make them successful. It's about creating an environment that allows them to be the best person that they can be, and not the other way around. Rather than seeing what can I get out of that person in order for me to achieve a different goal, right? Using people as a means to an end, but really focusing on those people and ensuring that they are successful. So it's around having conversations and developing those relationships in order to identify how you as a leader can maximize their strengths and create environments that will allow them to succeed in the roles that they're in. While yes, as a manager, in this facet, you still need to get work done, but in doing so, you're putting the focus on them and not the work itself.
It's so interesting. Like when you mentioned treating them as humans, I thought like, wouldn't it be nice if it wasn't the human resources department, but it was just like the human department? Like we actually
Yeah.
cared about the people and not them as resources. That would just be such a nice little shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, well, I just had this thought the other day, the HR, people ops, whatever whatever the industry is like thinking of itself right now, it's going through this monumental shift of trying to get back to that human experience, because it has been such a risk liability or a de-risking department within the organization, that the thought that I had was, well, the reason HR has turned into this money or this unhuman department has actually been the need for, or the desire to become more valuable to the business.
Mhm.
And the reason they want, or the only way they can be more valuable to businesses, is by thinking about the dollars and the cents. And so again, we've turned a whole industry of human resources and people operations that should have been for people, and turned it into, again, a we have reprioritized or deprioritized the human experience.
So I've given this talk a number of times about my experience in my MBA. And when I went to my MBA, I was very much the outcast. Like I didn't, there were a lot of people, previous experience in finance and accounting, and I was just lost. I was like, I'm kind of a creative marketing type, and I don't really belong here. Right. So when I got out of my MBA, I realized that I walked away with a couple big lessons. And one of those lessons was that money is the language of business. And I think what we're talking about here is kind of a fundamental shift in the language that we use when we think about and talk about business. The thing is that the reality of business is still that we think in terms of dollars and cents. We think in terms of revenue and expense. We think in terms of profit. We think about it, unfortunately, in a lot of companies, about returning shareholder value. So then we enter with these different proposals of putting people first, focusing on people's growth, creating diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments. And naturally, what we get back from businesses, well, what's the actual value of this? What's the monetary return we're going to get from this? How are you seeing in the conversations you're having in the spaces you're playing in? How are you seeing the receptivity to these concepts opening up and kind of divesting a little bit away from that conversation around money, but still acknowledging it?
Yeah, and that's a key piece, right? Is we still have to acknowledge it. We still have to kind of play that ball game, right? If everyone is playing the game a certain way, we can't suddenly change the rules on everyone. We are very, unfortunately, small group that is looking to make that shift. And so, as we're making those shifts, right, we are going to have to create more of a basis for this. And this will require us to change the culture of how we value people and money. And again, our society didn't always prioritize the money and the financial aspect of it. That's really only happened over the last 150, 200 years. And so what we really have to do is make that shift back. And it's going to take a long time. If it took this long to get to where we are today, it's going to take about that long to get to where we need to go. And so it may seem really tough to do, but as we're continually having those conversations, we need to remind other managers and other executives that the long-term investment is what is where we're going to see that return on investment, right? It's never going to be in the short term. Never. For example, I just onboarded a new team member on my team this last week. And when we look at something like new hire onboarding, we typically try, or most managers I see typically try to pass that off to other team members or other people that they manage. But that is a critical time, what I believe as a time when you need to build that relationship the most. I'm, as a manager, going to invest my time into that new hire and spend as much time as I can with them, because this is the time when they need to be cultivated and grown and have an environment where they feel safe, where they can explore and do the things that they need to do. And I know that that initial investment is going to pay dividends down the line.
I completely agree. And there's like a buyer's remorse thing that almost happens with, there's kind of two things that happen after somebody gets a job, right? There's the initial high of the new job, but then there's also a little bit of buyer's remorse. Should I have taken the other position? Should I have taken this job? There's all that. And I think the job of a leader and a lot of that, and to your point of not passing it off, is to say, no, you made the right decision. This is a team where you're going to grow, you're going to thrive, you're going to have opportunities. And
Mhm.
I think this speaks to something else. And I'd love your take on this as well. But I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, why would I invest in people when they may just take all of the skills and growth and everything and take that with them to a competitor somewhere else? To which my response would be, well, if you create the right environment, they're not going to leave, right? Like if you keep giving them opportunities for growth and everything, then you don't have to replace them. But I'm curious what your take is on that when people kind of come in with this idea of maybe, I don't know if I want to invest in people because what if they take that elsewhere, or what if it's all for nothing, or what if we have to fire them later, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, what happens if you don't, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
flip that on its head, right? And what happens if you don't invest in them, right? If you don't invest in people and their growth, your retention rates will go down. And the cost of rehiring someone in the same position is incredibly costly. Now, let's say this employee has some skills that need to be developed. How much productivity are you losing? How much revenue are you losing by not investing in them? So usually that small little investment again pays dividends, but you're not going to see it right away because skills are not turned on and off like a switch, right? And so those are things that we have to remind executives and other managers, is that we, as much as we would like for these things to be quick and easy, they are not. And so we have to make that initial, like we've been talking about, that initial investment in order for that to see change down the end, down the line.
Got it. So I'm going to ask you one more question before I ask you my final sign off question. I'm going to ask every guest, but um, if you were talking to a new manager, let's assume that right now amongst the people watching this video, either live or later, that there's a new manager who's, picked up the Lovable Leader because they know it's a great new manager handbook, and they they need to know, where do they start when it comes to putting people first? What are some of the first things that they need to do? What are some of the first conversations they might have? What are some of the things you might encourage them to think about? How would you go about, think of this as like the 2-minute new manager orientation to people first leadership. How would you go about describing that to them?
Well, for leading people first, again, it's about, and lovable leaders, it's about centering the human experience, right? Figuring out what other people need. I would say that there's a step even before that, though, and that's discovering who you are as a leader. And I
Yes.
think that that's something that we don't focus on as much, this idea of self-reflection, because how will you be a effective leader or an effective leader if you don't even know how you lead yourself or how you come off as yourself? And that's something that I've really discovered over the last year and a half, and having these discussions with other leaders, is having the ability to be humble and adapt and change and be willing to grow yourself and accept new information in order to grow. That is how you're going to make a bigger impact than if you were to just come in and say, okay, I'm just going to focus on you, but down the line you as a leader may trigger something that creates an unsafe environment or creates hostility or creates resentment with that individual, even if you have the best intentions for that person. But if you are not self-reflective and willing to change and grow as a leader, that's not gonna it's not gonna work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I somewhere in the book, I think I wrote something. You're not just accountable for you're not just responsible for the intent, but also the impact, right? So it's very much that you might go into it with the right intentions, but if you're not thinking about how this might create potential ramifications down the road, then you're not doing a holistic look at your role as a leader. So I completely agree with all of that. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to shift over to your experience in your career and ask you about the people you've had the chance to interact with in your role and in your career. And when I say the term lovable leader, one of the things I love about this book that I wrote is that the title was actually the first thing that came to me, and it just resonated for me because it immediately conjured for me people that I've interacted with that I was like, wow, that was a leader that I really loved. They were great. They really had it, they had my back. They looked out for me. They cared for me. And I feel like this is an experience that we all kind of share. And this could be someone from our personal life. It could be someone from our professional life, but there are lovable leaders in our life. So I'm curious for you, when you hear the term lovable leader, like who's the person that comes to mind, and what is it about them that made it that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The lovable leader that comes to mind, ooh, there's a few. Um,
We got some time.
yeah.
Yeah. Talk about it.
I would say the lovable leaders in my life, there's a couple, and one of them you're gonna talk to later is Yvonne Alston for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely a lovable leader. Um, and when I talk about Yvonne, it's what her and I talk about all the time. It's not just what's going on in the mind, but what's going on in the heart, right? And aligning with that heart space. Other lovable leaders are individuals like Melissa Goldner out in New York. She is an incredible leader who's focused on making change and paving a path for the people behind her or the people around her. She went into a very traditionally like male dominated field and very white dominated field, and she created the space to allow the women and people of color behind her to grow within that field in that industry. So that's another individual that I would say is a lovable leader. For the people that have managed me myself, um, I would say I'm racking my brain over the years. Um, my one of my last bosses at I don't know if I can name her out loud to be honest, but I will say the characteristics of what she has done has been to always ask and focus on me as the person and not me as the work. And so what she's done or what she did was to always focus on asking me and having those small conversations and building the relationship that her and I did, or her and I had, in order to create that trust and that space to allow me to be open if anything else were to happen. That way, if there were issues from a work perspective, I would feel comfortable bringing those things up.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I think the element of care there, the element of trust there. You didn't say it, but I would imagine there's an element of kindness there. You mentioned safety. I think all of those things are just so critical in the relationships that we remember. I mean, I think even when we look back, I know for myself, when I look back on the leaders I've had in my life, if they didn't possess those things, I don't generally think back and remember them fondly. You know, and even as far as I'll give you a good example of someone that I had in my life that I thought was like a is a really unique example of this that seems counter to what I think lovable leader conjures in people's minds. I had a business coach who, when I met him, I was like, this guy rubs me the wrong way because his personality was one that I generally would struggle with. He was kind of gruff. He was very direct, and he was like, a little abrasive at times. And I've always dealt in like in sports and everything. I never dealt well with coaches who were like, they would yell at you and get in your
Yeah.
face about that thing. I wanted the ones that would support me and help me grow. But I took on working with this coach because I was like, I feel like this is going to be an area of growth for me to work with this guy. But I also, under all of it, even though he was abrasive, even though he was a little gruff, I could tell that he cared. I could tell that he was actually invested in my success. That when he was challenging me, even though it was tough for me, even though it was something that made me feel like, God, this is annoying, I knew that he was looking out for my best interest there. And I actually knew that when he was telling me something that I could trust, that he wasn't doing it for his own benefit because I was going to pay him regardless, or I was going to work with him regardless.
Hmm.
And I knew that I could trust him for that. And even when he asked me to do things, when he asked me to like take on projects for myself, he let me know that I could do it. He gave me the ability to look at myself and see what I could do well, and gave me the I guess the confidence to know that I could actually go and achieve that goal. So he also created the safe travels. So even though we sometimes have people in our lives who may be difficult or who may be challenging to us or whose personalities we may find grating, we may not even like them, I guess is the point. We may still be able to love them for what they bring to us and the way that they look out for us, the way they care for us, the way we can trust them, and the way that they provide that safety for us on the way to our goal. So I wanted to point out that example because it came to mind as you were telling me about people that like, here's a person from my life that's just counter to what you generally expect in that term.
And that's why diversity is so important, right? And I know that we're essentially at time, but I want to point that out is that we need that diversity in our lives, and it's not just race, it's not just ethnicity or nationality or gender, but it's also personalities. It's also this idea of you need people to push you, and you need different types of people in your life to challenge you and help you grow because I tend to go back to the plant and gardening analogy.
Yep.
Even if you are surrounded by rocks, if you still have that good soil and you can poke a little bit through, it's still going to allow you to grow. It's just forcing you to change the direction that you may have gone, and that's okay. And that's something that, it's uncomfortable for us, but it is still okay, and it still allows us to grow. And you don't have to follow this specific personality type to be a lovable leader or to lead people first. You can still be who you are and be authentic and help others and still be focused on the people.
100% agree. Chris, you have been an amazing person to kick off this event. Thank you for coming on and talking with me about people first leadership. Thank you for all that you're doing out there. I love following you, and I love the stuff that you post. I love the people that you talk to, the conversations you have, and the leadership that you show out there in putting people first. So thank you for being out there and being a lovable leader. Thank you for coming on and supporting me in the show. Like, I really, truly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to support you, Jeff. And again, congrats. And I'm looking forward to everything that you're doing.
Thanks, man. And I'll see you tomorrow. For those that are watching, Chris is actually our closeout event with Yvonne Alston for tomorrow's event. So that is super exciting. You've opened the event, and I will see you at the closing ceremonies as well.
Sounds good. See you
All
tomorrow.
right. I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. We are in the in-between sessions right now. So give you a little chance to get a breather, get a break. We got about 15 minutes until Jeanette Bruni comes on to talk about care. So in the meantime, if you want to hit me up in the chat, any questions you have, any thoughts you have, anything like that, I already see that the chat's been active, so I really appreciate that. I got a cool quote from Q right here, which I'm going to put up on the screen. You don't have to like the people that are on your team. We must have a foundation of care with the people on your team. Agreed, agreed, agreed. And Q, it is good to see you. Good to see you. And then Alex, I quoted in the last, as I was talking with Chris, helps you know when you need to step into the role of leader and when you need to step into another role. So this was what we were talking about with role-based leaders. I'm currently planning some things about role-based leaders that'll come up in the future, but this idea that we are leaders in any moment where we decide to show leadership, and that contextually there are places in our lives where we are just perfectly suited to show leadership, where we have the based on the context of the situation, we have the ability to show leadership. If we're having a conversation about business strategy and we're talking about accounting, that is not my opportunity to show leadership. If there's any leadership for me to show in that, it is to step aside and amplify someone else for that conversation. So sometimes leadership means stepping to the side, and sometimes leadership means, even though you're not at the top of the hierarchy, stepping up and showing where you have leadership. So thank you all for those who have attended so far. We got a full day of events ahead of us. I'm going to have a sip of water because I'm going to be talking all day, and I've learned that hydration is very good for me. If you haven't picked up your copy of The Lovable Leader yet, please do. Copies on sale now and shipping from Amazon.com. Just look for The Lovable Leader. It's got the little chairs on the front. You can see a little picture right there. Really excited about it. So we got about 10 minutes left until our next guest comes in. So I'm just going to take a little break right here. Feel free to hang out in the chat with us and come back for the next session. We're going to be talking about care. It's got a good question from John. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. Here's a question for you. If someone is a good leader outside of the traditional business environment, but can struggle in managing people, how might you support said person? Okay, so this is an interesting question. So I'm picturing here maybe someone who's a leader on their hockey team, or maybe they're a leader in their church group, or they're a leader in some other area of life. John, hit me back if you think that that's what you're talking about. But my sense is what you're talking about here is someone who may be a little bit reluctant to show leadership in, say, a business environment. Maybe they're feeling like they don't have the standing to exhibit their leadership. But when they're in their kind of their zone or in their sort of element, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable in exhibiting that leadership. So if I was a leader to that person, or if I was a coach to that person, I would encourage them to kind of start small. I would look at them and say, you know, what are some areas where we might be able to kind of tiptoe in and start showing a little bit of leadership? And especially for someone, especially if they were a new manager, or if they were in a position where maybe they have people above them, people below them, or peers to the side of them, I would look for opportunities for them to show a little bit of leadership in each of those directions. You know, what's an opportunity for them to lead upward? What's an opportunity for them to lead someone maybe that they manage? And then what's an opportunity for them to lead some of their peers? I guess where I would probably start with it is that the same elements are going to apply regardless of where you are in leadership. The very last part of the Lovable Leader, the book, the very last thing is called Leading Upwards, and it's basically the idea that this entire framework of lovable leadership, this entire framework of putting people first, is that if you exhibit care, build trust, and create safe travels, it doesn't matter what direction you're leading. This is what all leaders must do: is create the circumstances where the care and the trust lead the way. When you have care and you have trust with people on your team, you are then able to lay out a vision of where you want to go and talk about how you're going to get there safely, right? So if you were leading to the side with one of your teammates, you might have a conversation where you sit down with them, and we'll talk about sitting on the same side of the table a little bit later on today. But you're going to have a conversation where you might say, "Hey, this is a thing that we're trying to accomplish." Let's say that you and a teammate are trying to coordinate the release of like a really big piece of content, let's say, and you need to work together on it. Say, hey, listen, you and I really need to work together to make sure that this thing works. I want to know how I can best support you and what things you feel are your core strengths so that I can step into the role of being able to support and fill out the areas where you're not as comfortable. Right? That's an opportunity for you to show leadership by supporting them, asking them, and gathering information from them about what it is that they want. Right. You might even want to set the context of that conversation at the very beginning. Like, hey, I'd love to talk with you about how the two of us can work together. My intention is to make sure that we both know what our roles are, that I'm supporting you, that you're supporting me, and that we have the best chance of getting what we need to get done. Right. So tell me how you think that that could work. Right. So you're setting the context and you're listening, maybe asking some follow up questions. And once you gather all that, you're going to want to validate that perspective, let them know, hey, I really appreciate all of your feedback. All of that's really interesting. I really, I enjoyed hearing your perspective. Here's where I see some places where what I was thinking, what you were thinking are kind of in alignment. Some things that I think that we're both thinking the same way about. You lay those sort of things out and then you say, okay, now that we've aligned on what are the things that we both think need to happen and what we both think we should be working on, let's talk about next steps. Let's do these sorts of things, right? So that's just a small way where just working with a peer, you're able to have a productive conversation and figure out what your roles are and work on the same project. Now, one of the places where I think a lot of managers, especially who this book was written for, the new managers struggle is in leading upward. How do you lead your boss? How do you lead someone that you report to? And I think this again, the same principles are going to apply. You need to make sure that your boss knows that you care about your work, that you care about them, that you know that they have a lot of stuff on their plate, and that you care about the outcome. That there's just care baked into how you work together, right? At the same time, you need to have worked on the fact that there needs to be trust established there, which means that they need to trust that you know what you're doing, that you have their best interest in mind, that you're there to support them. Like they need to trust that you are going to show up and do what you say you're going to do, right? So, and again, safe travels, you need to tell them, here's what the goal is, and here's how I'm going to make sure it works. So, when you're leading upward, one of the things that's going to change typically is that you want to come with a more solutions oriented approach. Whereas when you're working with people who are either at your level or who report to you, you may want to be in a little bit more of a solutions or a little bit more of a questioning mindset to help them grow in and offer up their solutions. When you're dealing with somebody that you're reporting to, you typically want to go to them with a solution already in mind, with the process already in mind. That doesn't mean that you're wedded to it and you have to do it, but that you're thinking about how you can actually make their lives easier. That's exhibiting care for them. So you might go to your boss and say, "Hey, um, I want to bring a project up to you, and I won't take more than 10 minutes of your time, but I wanted to make sure that I let you know what it is I'm thinking about working on, why I think it's a benefit to you and to our department, and I'm going to lay out the whole process for you. Do you have a few minutes for that?" Right. So now you're opening up that conversation with them about what it's for, why it's important, and why it benefits them. So then you might present, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this content promotion project, me and my colleague. Here's what we've aligned on. Here's what we thought was going to happen." And there's not too many downsides I can see in what we're proposing here. The one thing we have to be wary of is this. Here's how we're going to measure success. How does that sound to you? So that's exhibiting leadership because you're saying, hey, I want to take us over here. Here's how we're going to get there. I care about what this impacts on you. And don't worry, I don't need anything from you. We can actually handle this and I'll report in to you twice a week, let's say. So you're showing them, I care about you. I know you have things on your plate. I'm going to do this thing that's important for us, but doesn't require anything from you. You can trust me to do it because I've thought through the process. I've already had the conversation. I've got a full plan. And here's the upsides and downsides so you're informed. That's a way you can lead upward. So, the same principles are going to apply. I'm applying the same framework here that there's care, there's trust, there's safe travels. And in most of these example conversations I've shown, I'm using the sitting on the same side of the table framework, which I'm going to go over in more depth at 11:15. So, John, I hope that answered the question for you. All right. My next guest will be coming on very shortly, and I will be right back. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
It is so good to see you.
It is so good to see you too.
I figured since you dropped into the green room 2 minutes early, I could actually take those 2 minutes to say hello to you and connect with you instead of jumping right into our content. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been good.
Cool.
Yes.
I'm so glad you're here. You were the first person that came to mind when it came to care. I was like, well, I have to have Jeanette on.
All about the care, baby. It's all about the
Yeah.
care. We care about you, so that's why I'm here.
Perfect. See, we're exhibiting it in practice right now. This is how it
Exactly.
works. That's
Yes.
awesome. Where are you in the world right now? Are you in New York?
I'm up in the Catskill Mountains and it's snowing.
I love snow.
Yeah.
I thought about having a fire going behind me, like sort of fireside chats. I didn't know if it would enhance the aesthetic or not.
I know. I love that when there's a fireside chat and we have like the artificial fire going in the background.
I thought about having my iPad right here to do it that way as well, because then I wouldn't have to keep feeding it logs or anything. It would just kind of Yuletide keep going.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's a difference between the fire chat and the fireside chat.
Yes, the fire chats are rapid fire, right? They're like really, they're like super fast.
Yeah, one's
All right.
a little bit more casual.
Well, let's get started. I want to talk about care with you. So before we get started on the questions that I have prepared and things I want to talk about, do you want me to introduce you? Do you want to introduce yourself? How do you want to do this? It's up to you.
Well, why don't you start out with how we, know each other and how you know me, and I'll add a little bit of context.
Sweet. So we met, I don't remember exactly when we met. It was one of the events. We have like a speaking community, author community that we're both part of. And we ran across one another. And I think we might have sat and talked to each other for like 20 minutes in the midst of all of these people. Like you and I just sat down and just like straight up connected and talked for like 20 minutes. Had you on my show a couple times on Shareable. And like we just hit it off immediately. And I just dig your whole vibe on like how you're approaching your work, how you're approaching your life, what your values are. Like we just connected on that. So that's how I remember it, of how us connecting. What details did I miss?
I think that is the point, right? Is that we connected. We connected on something we both care about. And I think that's the whole point. Like that's how we connect with people, is that we find something that we care about. And I remember how I got really excited because you're also into superheroes.
Super into superheroes. And actually you were critical in that journey for me when I left my last company and I was kind of trying to decide what I wanted to do in the next stage of my career. Went on that little sabbatical. I talked to a lot of people, and you were one of there's probably 3 people that come to mind that were major influences in me deciding to start the Superhero Institute and to really go all in on the superhero thing. And you were adamant about it. You were like, no, superheroes is like a thing for you. So let's talk about it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I love superheroes too. When I grew up in Denmark, I was an only child. And this idea that we have a superpower was like I was totally into that. And as I've grown up, I realized that our superpower is that we're human.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like super
kind of
human.
paradox, right?
Yeah.
And it's this idea that we're like not really acknowledging how amazing and amazing. Like, why is this focus not off? Come on, stop pinging me. There we go. Like this idea that being human is actually pretty amazing and awesome, and we forget that. We forget how amazing we are as human beings.
I completely agree, and we see ourselves as units or cogs in the machine or units in the marketplace, when instead the thing that allows us to really connect they're not elements of what drives profit. It's what drives connection. And I so agree with you on that. So I want to go real deep into the idea of care here, because it's one of the 3 pillars of lovable leadership. When I outlined this book, it had been through like 5 or 6 outlines, and I started to notice some patterns emerging as I was writing it. And it started to come together that there were like 3 big themes that really make up lovable leadership. And one of those is care. And I break that down in the book in a number of different ways, but care has always been at the center of your work. And I was hoping you could start out just by talking a little bit about what does it mean to you when you talk about care?
I think of it as three parts. Because I talk about how our relationship with self, our relationship with others, and our relationship with work is actually all part of our self-care. It's not either or. And if we can start integrating that and recognizing that care is what drives all those three relationships. And unfortunately, a lot of times we abandon our self-care because we care so much about other things. And it's that misunderstanding of what really truly drives us and motivates us and engages us is actually what we care about. And we need to be inclusive of ourselves. So when I talk about self-care, I talk about care, I talk about the impact of that self-relationship, that self-care, not about the habits of it, but the mindset of it. So we get a little stuck in self-care being about, I'm supposed to do this, versus the relationship that it is. And as you talked about before as well in the previous session about that self-awareness that comes with actually having that positive, curious relationship with ourselves. So I think about care from the perspective of self-care as having that constructive, curious, positive, compassionate relationship with self, so that we can connect better with others and ask more curious questions, ask better questions that allow to foster that human connection that we thrive on and that we need, which is actually part of the self-care paradox. We need others as part of that relationship with self, right? So we think of self-care as over there on our own, but it's actually really an interactive relationship with other people as well. And then that shows up in how we care at work, which comes back to that engagement, but also having agency. So how we care and work is about how we feel in the workplace. So self-care is about the self-awareness and that sort of self-communication, self-awareness, self-responsibility, and self-expression. So I base that on 4 questions we can ask ourselves to cultivate a positive relationship and help us find the road through the noise so that care comes from us. And then the way we engage with others is through, again, the care is spelled out as curiosity, acknowledgement, respect, and empathy. And that's where you and I overlap a lot, right? And that how do we cultivate better conversations based on them being care driven? And what does that mean? And then that shows up in a culture where people feel confident. They feel that they have agility and resilience, and they're feeling empowered. They have agency over their day, which is also, by the way, how we also prevent burnout, but also work better in general. So that care that comes from the conversations, I think, is where you and I really sort of connected a lot, and we can go more into where that comes from for me as well, if you want.
Oh, we're gonna go so deep into all this because we got plenty of time for this, which is great. We got plenty of time to go into it. One thing I want to just point out is I appreciate how you've brought self-care into the conversation of care. In the book, I break out self-care as its own chapter because I actually think what you're proposing as self-care being a part of care in the conversation of care as a leader is even a little hard to swallow at times because we struggle with self-care on its own. So I kind of broke it out in its own category, but I believe everything you're saying here because I can't remember. I think it was Brene Brown who did research that basically showed that people who can't love themselves can't love others, right? So it's this idea that if you want to be a leader that cares about other people, you first have to care about yourself. You have to attend to your own thoughts and feelings. And something that Chris brought up in the last session was about getting introspective before venturing out and trying to lead and getting comfortable with like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where do you feel vulnerable? Where do you feel powerful? And all of those sorts of things. So I really appreciate the perspective that you're bringing of bringing self-care into care. So you were teed up for it. You were ready to go into it. Talk a little bit about where that comes from for you and why that is a way that you think about care for, as you know, in the context of leadership and teams. Where does the self-care thing come in for you?
Yeah. What I've often seen is that people function from a very sort of mental perspective. Now, I am saying it's about mindset, which can be confused with being more mental. But when I talk about mindset, it's more attitude. It's more perspective, right? It's not just about that mental, like, you know, I think we like to have strategies. We like to know what to do, but it becomes very mechanical.
Yes.
It becomes, okay, I'm just doing all these things, which is one of the reasons why most of the time self-care doesn't work, because people have adopted to these habits that they think they should have, rather than pausing for a moment and say, hey, what do I need right now so I can be present for us having this conversation right now? Might
Yeah.
be different than what I need later on this afternoon for being present to a conversation this afternoon. Like, we need different things throughout the day, and we're not static people. And having that relationship with how we change all day long, and different things that we need so that we can show up fully. And what does that even mean? To me, that means we pay attention. We have the right intention so that we can pay attention, because intention fuels attention.
Mhm.
And so if our relationship with self is that inner dialogue that's like, oh my God, I'm messing up here. I'm not good enough to be on your dialogue right now. If I had that internal conversation, I wouldn't show up authentic. I wouldn't show up about what I care about.
Mhm.
I would show up trying to mimic what I think you care about, because I would be trying to please you, because I
Mhm.
wouldn't be in a right relationship with myself. And so I think a lot of leaders are either completely blind to their own, I don't know, like, not blind, but ignore and abandon. I'm trying to be mindful of not using the word blind when we actually are not blind, because I want to try to understand how people who are actually blind can find that offensive.
Yeah.
But it's so much part of our vocabulary. So I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that they're being ignorant to how they show up, right?
Yes.
Because they've done leadership for so long. And then a lot of other leaders are too conscious about how they show up. And neither one of them cultivate a good and healthy relationship. And so one of the things I learned throughout my life of being a leader, and being a very young leader, was that I accepted the fact that there were things I didn't know. And I asked my team, what is it that you know that I still don't know? Because I'm new here, I'm leading you, it's a new team for me. What is it that you know about our customers that I need to learn, so that you and I can cultivate a good working relationship and reach our results together? Right? That was my question to people who had been doing the business for, I don't know, 20 years, and I was completely new as a leader. And I think that was the inspiration of my dad, who always said, we need to connect with people and understand where they're at, like where they're at. But we also have to trust ourselves. Right? And that's where the care comes in, is that place of like really caring enough about ourselves to show up authentically, meaning we're not dismissing and ignoring all of what's going on the inside, but we're also not falling into the hole. So when I talk about self-care, I talk about really coming into that right relationship with ourselves, which is a big part of the mindfulness practice that I've done for 35 years. But I was pushed into it. I was pushed into it because I had some traumatic experiences and found myself confused about my place in the world. And so, and thankfully that happened early on in my career. And so I really had to sit down and say, who am I as a leader? Who am I as a human being? Where do I feel that I connect and create impact, and all of these questions, we can make them curious and constructive instead of beating ourselves up. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in this loop of beating ourselves up rather than actually being curious and constructive. And that's the care piece that really, I think, changes things, is that when we care about ourselves because we care about doing a good job and connecting with the people we lead, the way we ask questions change. And that changes the dynamic between people. Does that make sense?
It
Like,
does. It does. So what stuck out for me there is like how crucial curiosity actually is here, because what I wanted to ask you about next, and the path I kind of wanted to take it down, was around, cultivating this mindset of care. And there's kind of a couple things that you brought up for me, which is about the importance of, one, self-care, in being able to be a leader who sees through the lens of care. How do we do that, right? And you've brought up the idea of one, it requires a focus on self-care, of understanding ourselves and the voices in our head and working on that and working on our self-talk and all the things that have to do with us and our own self-care. And then there's the relationship. You mentioned the three things: the relationship to ourselves, the relationship to others, and a relationship to the work. And actually in the book, I talk about you have to care about the work, you have to care about your people, you have to care about your own purpose and what you're after, right? So so you brought that up, and what I wanted to ask you is, how do you cultivate that? But what I'm getting from this is that it kind of really begins with, in all of these cases, a bit of curiosity. You have to be
Yeah.
interested in what's going on inside and be curious about that and be willing to go down that rabbit hole. And then with others, to your point of the example you gave, asking them questions, inviting them in, building connection, and showing care by being curious about what's going on for them, what's going on in their own mind of self-care, what's important to them and what they see. Do they feel validated? Do they feel seen? So
Yeah.
it is did we just figure it out? Is curiosity the key to unlocking the mindset of care?
Yes, I believe it is, and that's why I'm so so sort of focused on pausing.
Yeah.
Like that power pause that allows us to shift in that moment where we're rushing to solve a problem, rushing to fix something, and we're just doing what we've always done, versus taking that pause for a moment and say, wait a minute, let's just figure out what's actually going on. What is the real challenge we're trying to solve here? What do you think is the way forward? And actually having a conversation that becomes more inclusive. That's a care-driven conversation as well. We talk about diversity and inclusion, and that means being able to have conversation that is inclusive of other people's viewpoint and perspectives, and actually listening to them, not just allowing people to pour it in,
Yeah.
but actually listening to it and asking more questions about it. Again, the intention that follows, that fuels the attention, is the intention is, I want to actually learn what I might not know. Even though I think I know everything, I want to learn what I might not know. And if a leader can have that conversation and say, what is it that you see differently that I don't? What is it that where we're not aligned? Because a lot of times people, they feel that they're not performing to the expectation of their leader. And a lot of times people don't know what they're measured on other than results. But we're actually measured along the way in how we think and how we approach something, right? Because the leader might think, you're not doing it the way I would do it. And then if the leader is caring about the person rather than just the result, they're going to have a conversation. They're going to have a conversation that, okay, how can we figure this out? What do you need so that you can work better? What do you need so that you can? What's standing in the way? That's a care-driven conversation. That's because the leader cares about the person, not just about the result. And so there's a lot of ways that care shows up naturally when we're curious.
I love the remark you made about the power pause, something that I'm working on in my own life to constantly work more on power pausing. But I think one of the real benefits of that power pause is that, especially in a leadership role, I feel there's a real pressure to solve problems, to feel
Yes.
like you have the answers. And so often when we're in that mindset, we take ourselves out of the coaching mindset, of the development and the growth mindset as a leader, to ask the right questions. And that power pause does really give us the chance to stop for a second and reflect on, what is my role right now? Is it to solve the problem, or is it to help my team grow and solve the problem themselves? And that power pause gives you the opportunity to ask that question. And to your point, when you make curiosity a part of your mindset, when you get curious about yourself, you get curious about the team, and you want to exhibit care in all of those aspects, that curiosity will show up as, let me ask more questions rather than solve. So I really appreciate that, for lack of a better term, the tactical usage of a power pause to really remind yourself that part of your role as a leader, one of the ways you're going to be able to exhibit care, is pause, get real curious, and then ask questions so that other people can get involved, get engaged. And to your point, it's not just the tactic of asking the question and letting them talk. It's actually hearing what they're saying, letting what they're saying actually land, hearing what's going on with them, whether it be, professional or something that's impacting their work professionally, which is actually what I want to ask you about next, which is, in the conversation of care, it could be it could almost, in the context of business, sound very cold. like care as a tactic, like we will use care to get the most out of our human resources. But
Yeah.
I actually think that there's no real delineation between who we are at work and who we are at home. We are people. And especially now amidst the pandemic, like I've got kids' toys behind me as I'm doing this full day event, right? Like our lives are our lives. And what happens outside of work impacts people at work. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a leader that cares about the person, not just the employee?
Yeah. And I love that you're taking that sort of like the employee versus the person. I think I'm going to answer it this way. I think this is probably the best doorway in. I think a lot of companies right now are concerned about people leaving, people burning out, and so on and so forth. So they instill a lot of well-being programs, which are great. We need them. People need to have access to the resources, but that's to care for people, right? And so that's the employee, that we're shoving it over there. It's your own problem. Self-care is your thing. You figure it out. You use the program and you'll be fine. You'll be better, right?
Yep. It's a Tylenol for your headache rather than addressing why you have headaches.
Yeah. And we know this from our mindset of fixing a disease, not by changing what's causing it, but by doing something for the symptoms of the disease. We take a pill, we do whatever, but we don't actually look at what's the root cause of the problem, right? So when I was in functional medicine and practiced health and well-being, I could constantly see that stress was the symptom, but the root cause was not feeling seen and heard and included at work.
Yeah.
That's what caused the stress, right? But then we could fix stress, but we're not going to fix stress if we don't change the relationship.
It keeps coming
so
back.
It keeps coming back. It's going to keep coming back. We're not changing. We can't change our environment. We can change culture, but we can't change all the constant changes and challenges that we're going through right now. But we can navigate them differently. And a leader that looks at the human being and the person says, I understand that this is stressful for you. What do you need so that you can navigate this a little better? Like, how can I support you not feeling uncertain or doubtful? Like I talk about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yep.
Right. And those three FUDs that are sort of always there, and especially right now. And if a leader ignores that and pretends that we don't all have fear, uncertainty, and doubt in us, but wants to just be like, what are you doing to fix the project versus how are you doing so that you can work on this project? They're missing the opportunity to actually strengthening the process of getting good work done.
Yeah.
Because if we ourselves are sitting around having fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, are we doing a good job, for example? Guess what? We're not going to do a good job.
Yeah.
Because we're not actually using the strength which we were hired for, which is our skills and our opinions and the way we see the world. Then we're ending up just executing something, hoping that it will satisfy our leader. But if there's a care about the person, then we're changing that dynamic and talking about how are we achieving the success and the results and the projects and that piece. And that's where I think a lot of leaders right now are burning out too, because they think they have to care for people. They have to fix what people are going through. And that's where you have somebody's back, is just to say, I care about you. Are you okay right now? What's going on? Do we need to talk about anything before we jump to the work conversation?
Yeah.
You know, it's a small question, just somebody knowing. And to be honest, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. The amount of emails I have gotten from people saying, my mother just died, my dad just died, my friend just died. We can't ignore that this is happening a lot more these days than ever. Of course, it's always happened, right? It's always happened that we have these losses, but we have ignored it. And people feel that they have to come back and be normal within 2 weeks. It's like, that's not right. But what we can do is say, I understand that you have to integrate this loss or whatever it is, the grief or the fear or the uncertainty, all of these things. I understand you have to integrate it. How can I best support you in doing that as we're doing this work together?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction in there that you made that's really important, because this is this is an area that I think is very difficult for leaders. And here's why I think it is that there's that invisible line between what's work and what's personal, right? There's that, it's not personal, it's just business. When in reality, everything that happens to you is personal to a certain extent. So, I think leaders really struggle to know the line, the boundary. And I think the distinction you made in there is actually probably the most useful way of thinking about it, is that you have to care about people, not care for people. That means you don't actually have to call them on nights and weekends to check in with them. It does mean that you should be available to support them as needed, potentially nights and weekends. And I'm not saying people should, work beyond their 40 hours. I'm not advocating that, but to the degree of like the framing of it is that you are there to support, you are invested and interested in making sure that you care about that person, but you're not necessarily taking accountability to fix their problem. You are there to provide support if it helps to fix their problem, but it is not an invasive thing. And I think that that's the invisible line that so many leaders struggle with, is knowing like, well, is this crossing a line if I ask them if they're okay? No. It crosses the line if you bring up specifically a thing and you make them talk about it and you invade and intrude upon their personal lives. But I think looking at them as a human being and caring about them and giving them the space that they need. And I think your example about the deaths in the family is such a good one. One of the examples I give in the book is I watched as a client company I'd been working with, their most valuable employee had to go out for a death in the family. And while this employee, their most valuable, like this is the person that like made the business run. While this person was out for a death of a very close family member, they're emailing this person and texting them to ask about projects that was on this person's plate. And they lost that person shortly thereafter. They dipped out because they were like, you don't actually care about me. I was going through the most difficult time of my life, and all you cared about was your project. Figure it out. Like, give me the space. So I think that's, I found that such a prime example of like a company that does not actually care about the person.
When my mother suddenly died, and you and I have had this conversation, so I know you're comfortable with it. When my mother suddenly died while I was at work, and I went, home to wait for my dad so I can tell him what had happened. I was in the middle of a business deal. And the person that was very, very high up in the organization in Europe called me, and I picked up the phone, and he said X, Y, and Z, and whatever, got into the work conversation. And I said to him, yes, I can so and so and so put this and that together. However, I will be gone for about a week or two because my mother just died. And he goes, your mother just died? When? I was like, a couple of hours ago. He goes, and you picked up the phone?
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about this at all. Nothing is urgent. And so his response was
good reaction.
Amazing. He wasn't even saying, just have somebody get back to me. He just said, we're not talking about this. This is not urgent. We were talking about a business deal that was in process. And so his response was just, and he even said to me, and this is not a person I know very well. He said, if you need anything, you let me know. I didn't even know him beyond business. And I think that's the key. If you need anything, let me know. I'm here. And somebody can care about people just by saying, listen, if you want to talk about it, let me know. But we don't have to force people to talk about it.
Exactly.
We don't have to be the leader that says, oh, tell me, are you okay? We can just be the leader that says, wow, we can share what we've gone through ourselves and be like, making it an open and natural conversation that we have human challenges as part of the human experience, and we're not leaving that outside of work. And that's where the care comes in. But I do want to talk about another part of the care, and that is care for our customers. Because a lot of times that care, if we have care as a company about each other, it brings it all the way to the customers as well. And you talk about purpose earlier, we have to do work that matters. That's also about what we care about. And that's the alignment with a company that has a brand that we care about, or a company that treats their customers well. And I think there's an alignment that's happening where culture and customer care has to line up. Because if not, it's just all fake.
I agree. It all has to be part of the same conversation about it, to your point. It's all part of, it all stems from the same core of care.
It does. Yeah.
So I want to, I only have a couple minutes left with you before our next guest comes on, but I wanted to ask you the question I'm going to ask every guest today. But when I say the words lovable leader, who from your past or present comes to mind?
For sure, my dad comes to mind. He was the one that inspired me to be curious. And he was the one that always told me that people will tell you what they need if you ask them.
A good one.
It's so simple.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you as a leader care about somebody and ask them what they need, you will start a completely different conversation. And the kind of conversations that I always heard him have with leaders and executives and CEOs and the people he was always talking to, it was always about their personal lives and what they cared about. It was about what was important for them. And he cared about that. So he got to know the person before he proposed them to run a company with multi-million-dollar whatever. So it was the person he needed to know to see if that was a match. And that came from being curious and caring about people, but also caring about his client. So he's inspired me so much throughout the years. And he always said that we don't connect with people through conversations that are mentally driven. We do it through heart-driven conversations. And that brings me to another leader who's doing a lot of work in this arena is Claude Silver, who really always talks about the heart in leadership today. And she's doing a lot of great work in terms of moving that leadership conversation forward about heart-driven leadership. I talk about it as human intelligence, heart intelligence, human intelligence. So I talk about it where our emotional intelligence and our heart intelligence meet, and that becomes our human intelligence. So I love how to work those things in. But there are people that inspire throughout, like, there are so many. I could probably mention a lot, but those are people I personally have connection with.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. I always love talking to you, catching up, talking on a podcast, doing something like this. I always just appreciate the time that we get to spend together. And I always feel like I learned something from you, and it helps me to reset sometimes and remind myself that self-care is important. You always help bring that to the surface for me. So I always appreciate that from you. Thank you for coming on this event. Thank you for supporting my book launch, and everyone go and check out Jeanette. She's amazing. I think I put everything in the blog post where people can go and connect with you, but I will make sure that in follow-up posts, everything will be linked.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
you.
Good luck with the book. I think everybody should read it, even if they're not just a new manager.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, coming up next, my next guest is in the green room. I'm about to bring him in. And I got to tell you, I'm super, super excited for my entire lineup is amazing. This is one where I reached out to this guest cold because I am just such a raving fan of his book, The Code of Trust. My next guest coming up is Robin Dreeke. He's a former head of FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. He's the author of multiple books on trust. And he wrote The Code of Trust, Sizing People Up, and It's Not All About Me. He's the founder and principal at People Formula, which is a leadership and communication strategy company. Joining me right now is Robin Dreeke. Robin, thank you for joining my launch event. I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
Jeff, thank you. I got goosebumps right now for you and your book, as well as I'm glad my internet's stable right now. Fingers crossed. I literally logged on and it crashed on me. So fingers crossed. I got my phone up in the window just in case I got a tether to that. So I'm going to
okay. Good stuff. Well, I saw you come in and then drop out, and I was like, oh God, no, I hope he's still going to show up. So I'm glad that you're here. So your background is like super interesting. My introduction to you actually came from, it was I think it was DEF CON or is that probably the name of it? Yeah. It was a social engineering conference. I saw you speak and I was like, wow, this guy is incredible. His entire background so fascinating. So for people who are just for the first time becoming familiar with you, can you give just a brief background of like, what was your background? What was the stuff you did? Like, it wasn't working at Starbucks. You did something a little bit different.
You know, it's funny. So it depends on how far you go back. Life is full of fantastic learning moments and failures. That's how I came up with the whole concept that trust and healthy relationships are the bedrock to everything and being a lovable leader. Naval Academy graduate, did the Marine Corps after that for 5 years, got out of captain, came in the FBI in 1997. Didn't know what I was going to do in the FBI. I got a cyber counterintelligence. And so for my entire career, spies and counter national threat against adversaries in the world. And I got our counterintelligence back 2000, late 2001, 2002, team member, and then I took over our in 2010 ish and ran it for a number of years. Retired in 2018.
That's amazing. And when did you start taking this? I mean, you had applied the ideas of trust in your work, in your kind of in your day job. When did you start to kind of break that out and think this might be a place where I can go and take the rest of my career and actually start to help people outside of my immediate needs of my day job?
It's a great question. So when I got assigned, I went from New York to Norfolk, Virginia, FBI headquarters and management. Then I asked to go down to Quantico and start teaching this at the advanced level, the recruitment operations and false flags and all that hooky spooky spy stuff. And when I took over the team and started teaching this, what I started realizing was that when you're working this world of counterintelligence, where you're selling a service, which is American patriotism, and your only client is a foreign national who's under the cover of diplomatic immunity and a spy, it's the toughest sales job in the world. And it comes down to, you have to build trust, because no one's going to take any action, share information, or even put their life in your hands unless you have trust. From trust, you have a healthy relationship. And basically, it was me discovering when I was trying to break down this art form into a paint by number that this is actually the core of human behavior, which is basically understanding that every human being is constantly seeking their own psychological comfort and always are taking actions in their own best interest in terms of it. And so as long as you can figure out unbiasedly, letting go of your prejudices and judgment of others, what other people see as their best interest from their point of view and psychological comfort from their point of view, if you take actions and provide resources in terms of those things, in terms of them, communicate in terms of them, you're going to have trust and you're going to have relationships and you're going to become that lovable leader.
Yeah, I mean, wow. So I'm so glad that you just used the expression paint by numbers, because I think this is one of the things that I found so interesting about your book, and especially about this conversation around trust. So I love to read about people. I love to read about how people work. I like to understand how the psychology of decisions are made and influence and persuasion and all that. And I think at a certain point, once you learn enough about it, you start to feel like this, ooh, do I know a little too much about this? Like, is this potentially going to become something that gets in the way because it becomes a little too tactical? And now all of a sudden I can paint by number and always get what I want. But your book does such a nice job of explaining the reason behind this and sort of the ethical application of utilizing trust. And I appreciate that when you got into the tactical code of trust, you actually talk about everything from how you open a conversation to the environment you choose to all of that. So I guess I just want to, as a starting point, thinking about the role of a leader, you broke it down. You said the role of people. This is how we connect. This is how we find our own psychological safety for individuals. So why is it important that trust be a central component of leadership, not just like a nice to have? Why do you see that as something that every leader should be cultivating and learning how it works and applying it?
Because it's bedrock to everything. I often talk that, we're put on this planet and exist in this universe to not be a solo creature. We're here to interact. We're here to solve challenges in life and our problems with a collective, with relationships. And you can't have healthy relationships without trust. And so it becomes, the how of the big why of the why is having good, healthy, professional, happy relationships. And the bedrock of that is trust. And so it became everything. And so, and you talked about, the tactical use of the strategies and techniques of building trust. And so, and you alluded to it there a little bit, so how does that relate to, how's that not manipulation? How's that not taking advantage of people?
Yes.
It's really simple. Transparency. I am completely transparent with, hey, you look at that background of mine. I am a hard charging type A by personality, by nature and nurture, my upbringing. And if you're going to use that behavior, you're going to fail majestically if you're going to inspire trust, because that behavior is about power, which is about self. Leadership is about others. And so we're all hardwired for our own personal survival to varying degrees. And me, when you're self-reliant as a young kid, when you are, gregarious and outgoing and popular, you start mistaking leadership for power, because power is about self. And so it really took me making and writing my 3 manuals, my books on how not to be the self-centered narcissist I was born to be, and make it about others. And what I'm constantly doing is I'm transparent. People say to me all the time, Robin, you doing it to me now? I said, what, making it about you? Yes, I am, because I suck otherwise. You won't want to listen to me because I want to talk about me, 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 me. I want to take care of my needs. So it's about being transparent. It's demonstrating vulnerability. It's like funny, when you've asked the first question, so tell me about your background. Well, the real background is I wanted to be an astronaut. I want to become an aerospace engineer, Navy pilot, astronaut, and I failed at everything. And life goes sideways, and into those other realms. It's because I succeeded at some things in life that I had teachers, mentors, and guides, and healthy relationships. And the things I fell sideways on were when I didn't have trust. I didn't have healthy relationships. And I recognize those things. So, life is that journey, and your last guest down there talking about, self-care. Yes, that is a huge part of developing and inspiring trust, is comfortable with self. How well do you know yourself? I'm a massive Stoic, the Stoic philosophies. I'm about empathy. I just got done reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, Ryan Holiday's books, but also I read all the leadership books out there, by Simon Sinek, Jocko Willink, and Leif Babin. Matter of fact, I got Simon Sinek's latest book here. Yours is phenomenal, by the way.
Ah, thank you so much.
Your breakdown, it's like reading what I wish I'd written. Because we're so in sync with our philosophies of leadership and trust, but you did such a beautiful job of writing it that I love the excerpt you sent me. And so anyway, I can't say enough about it. Anyway, that's my long answer to everything.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. I'm now flabbergasted. I had a follow-up question to that, but you caught me off guard with that one. But I did want to point out that the thing you said about transparency is such an interesting one, because your background actually makes that crystal clear. You are coming as a representative of the United States, trying to basically convert somebody from the other side. And you're saying, this is what I'm trying to do. Now tell me what you need, right? So you're laying it all out there. And meanwhile, we've got leaders who are trying to get somebody to, collaborate with a teammate they don't get along with, right? And like, that's their big hurdle that they can't overcome, and be transparent enough to say, hey, here's what's important in this situation. Mm-hmm. And you're dealing with like these matters of amazing national importance. So I think it's really important to kind of identify that transparency is one of the key factors, where you're not trying to manipulate people, because you're laying it all out there for them to see. So so I wanted to kind of turn towards, well, then where does the problem crop up, right? You mentioned the ego as being a big part of it, but like leaders, when they're trying to learn how to develop trust with their team, where have you seen, I know you work with leaders across the spectrum of different types of organizations, different size teams, different levels of importance of the sort of things they need to build trust for. Where do people tend to bump into something? What is that big thing that's the most common?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of them in there, because it really, there's not one size fits all, not one size fixes everyone, that is failing in the leadership spectrum. I think, some of the biggest ones are things you mentioned, like insecurities, vanity, ego, title. They think it's about title and position. They think it's about power, which I alluded to, which is about self. They don't understand, about leadership is about being of service to others, accomplishing mission goals and priorities, creating a safe environment for people to innovate in, both psychologically, physically, and emotionally, and then being a resource for those around them. So those are some of the easy ones. But you used the word back there, convert. A lot of leaders think they have to convert someone to their way of thinking, or I have to convert someone from supporting their own country to supporting mine. No, you don't. Leaders that think they have to convert someone are not understanding the why. Let's talk, Simon Sinek's, start with why is what is the big reason and big purpose we're actually doing what we do. And if a leader doesn't understand that big purpose and reason why someone is actually, in one of their employees is flipping a switch or creating a widget and articulating that to them, then that's their fault. So leaders' job and responsibility, part of it is ego suspension, getting rid of your vanity and your sense of self-importance, and also communicating and understanding the why so they can pass that why down so everyone understands how they're contributing, how they're being part of a greater whole and collective, because that rewards our brain. When we're part of a collective environment, when we're being valued by that environment and we see our role and responsibility inside that environment, that makes us feel good. And so it's a combination of suspending your ego and vanity, as well as communicating the why and the purpose and demonstrating that value and affiliation to someone. And language is a great way we do that. I talk about my 4 pillars of communication, and leaders fall short of doing that. So I think it's a myriad of all those things that I see people falling short on.
So your books are just an absolute treasure trove of easy to follow steps. Like when you talk about paint by numbers, that is a really beautiful way of illustrating it. So you talked just now about the 4 pillars of communication. Are there any of the frameworks from either any of your books that you'd care to share that you think will help people that are in a new leader role specifically to develop trust with their team?
So I'm going to go, there's so many things, there's so many different aspects, but let me share these 4 pillars, because these 4 pillars are the critical, I got goosebumps talking about this stuff, are so critical to shifting the focus. Because remember, I think we can all agree that leadership is about others and not about self.
Yep.
And so how to communicate in terms of others, it's really simple. And this is what I had to learn. This is what no one could teach me. They said, just do it. This is that assumed knowledge, that paint by that art form that I had to break down. And this is it. Seek if you're a new leader or established leader, I don't care what it is, seek the thoughts and opinions of others rather than sharing yours. 2, speak in terms of their priorities and challenges instead of yours. 3, validate them non-judgmentally. Have non-judgmentally, your last guest was saying this, non-judgmental curiosity about them without judging. Doesn't mean you agree. It means you're seeking to understand at a deeper level. This is the empathy step. And 4, empower them with choices. And so when you give someone a choice, so that last one's the one that really gets people. I don't want to give people a choice. Yes, you have to, because here's what's really cool about this. If you give someone a choice, are you going to give them a choice you don't agree with? No. I always empower people a choice, walking away and never talking to me again. And if you're doing all the other ones first, and their brain, the endorphins and the dopamine on the short term, and then you got the serotonin and oxytocin for the long-term relationships, you move beyond the transactional and long-term relationships where lovable leaders like to live. Yep. When you're doing those 4 things, their brain chemistry is saying yes, 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 yes. So when you actually give someone the choice to walk away, which is empowering them, which gives them a sense of psychological comfort and safety, are they ever going to walk away? No, it hasn't happened. So those 4 things dramatically shift. Instead of telling someone what you think, ask them what they think about what you think. Just that little shift of language, because it makes it about them. You don't plant seeds with people by telling them what you think. You plant seeds with them by asking them what they think. It's the difference between convincing someone of something and inspiring someone about something.
I love it. There's so much in there. And as I'm going to talk about shortly, the sitting on the same side of the table, our frameworks have so much in alignment, specifically the point that you make about validating instead of judging, or validating non-judgmentally. I cannot even express what a difference that's made in my life, but in terms of the people that I've coached about this, when they've shifted from telling people what they think about a thing versus just acknowledging that this person feels that way and that you understand, like listening from the perspective of trying to understand where they're coming from and validating it, not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong, but just really getting it. You can't have a conversation until someone sees that you are on the same page with them, that you can at least appreciate their perspective, because otherwise you're just on the attack with them and then they're on the defense, and you're not going to have that productive conversation. And then the other thing that I really love, and this overlaps again with the framework that I've put together, but when you talk about giving people choices, I include something like that at both the beginning and end of productive conversations, which is you have to get people's consent to even have that conversation. You have to give them the choice to have the conversation or not. Because if you're just springing a conversation on someone as a leader, you barge into their office and you're about to have the conversation that they weren't ready for, it's not going to go particularly well. You know what I mean? So I really love those communication steps you've laid out. Thank you so much. And you are actually inspiring me to get to work on the audiobook faster, because you were asking about it, and it's on my list of things to do. But the fact that I know that if I do the audiobook faster, that I'm going to get you to read it, that's high on my list. Yeah. So I want to go back to those communication tips real quick, because instead of giving your opinion, asking people, something that I've thought a lot about is the relationship between, and you talked about language, using the term I and using the term you, right? Like, I think that in general, if we can take our automatic instinct, whenever we want to say I, start it with a you, and whenever we want to say it with a you, flipping it and using an I think that's another good way of thinking about it. Whenever I want to call you out on a thing, it's better for me to say I was feeling this way or that way about the situation versus saying you did that thing, right? And by contrast, if I want to gather, I want to talk about a strategy or something like that, instead of saying I want to do this, say I was thinking this. What do you think about that? Flip- Yeah. So I really love that tip of flipping the sort of the I and the you is how I'm going to summarize that. But like, instead of telling people your opinion, asking for theirs, I think that's such an amazing tip in terms of helping to build trust and connection with people. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I 100% behind that. And I just had a thought, but I candidly I just lost it. Yeah. So because I saw a thing that your audio was chipping a little bit, so I got all good, all good, all good. Um, but there was another thing I was going to ask you about with regard to, yes, that there it is. Um, you talk about setting the right environment, and I think that this is something that's often overlooked. When we, even if you were to follow all of the rest of your communication tips, I think the part where you talk about setting the right environment, picking and choosing the right place, even, in one of your examples in the book, you talk about, the right reward for the right person. Like, you were trying to kind of carrot on the end of the stick. That's about listening and understanding where they are. I think choosing the environment is a similar sort of thing. And a lot of leaders, I think, even if they get a lot of the other stuff right, they might fall into the trap of, come into my office, we'll have a talk. That person's sitting on the chair that's lower than them, and you're having this awkward conversation. Could you talk a little bit about, how you see the impact of environment on the ability to build trust? Yeah, I think your audio is probably coming through now. But possibly not. Yeah, I don't know. Um, that's strange because I mean, I hear your audio and your audio would be what's broadcasting. So I'm not sure what might be happening. Hold on a second. Okay, I just turned your audio. I turned your audio levels up a little bit. That might help. um, well, we're running close to the end of our time, and I did want to ask you a little bit about lovable leadership in your career and your experience, and people that um, um, yeah, right. Happens so fast. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about lovable leadership in your experience. You know how you attempt to be a lovable leader, but also realistically, what I would love to know most is your experience with lovable leaders. When I say lovable leader, who comes to mind for you from your past, from your present? Um, what does that mean to you? Yeah. Yeah, when I think about what defines a lovable leader, the three biggest pieces are, that they care about you, that you can trust them, that there's a strong sense of trust, and that they provide psychological safety on the way to big goals. And those big three, I think, embedded in that is going to be, respect and kindness. But I think the big things are you may not always like them, but you probably know that they care about you, know that they respect you. They are someone that you trust, and therefore there's a sense of love there. There's a sense of connection. There's a sense of care. So that's how I tend to think about them, and I think your examples are good ones. Um, I just want to give a shout out to you for taking my inquiry and for showing up. And I am such a huge fan of your work, and I encourage everybody out there to pick up a copy of any of your books. I'm putting it on my recommended reading page that I'm building for new managers. I think that there's 5 or 6 books. It's not up yet, but there's gonna be 5 or 6 books up there that I think are like, if you're a new manager, these are the ones that you should read, and I think Code of Trust has to be up there. It was a major inspiration for me, so I just wanna thank you for writing it, thank you for doing the work you do, and, thank you for coming on and supporting this book launch. It means a lot. Heck yeah, man, heck yeah, major influences, major influences. Awesome. Thank you, Robin. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on, and we'll be in touch soon. And as soon as the audiobook is out, you're my first person to know. All right. Thank you. See you. All right, so hopefully Robin's audio came back in for the end of that. If you didn't hear it, I am going to have all of these videos posted and cut up into their individual pieces. So you'll be able to actually see all of it. I'm going to make sure that the audio works before I post it, the clip on YouTube. But that was